And joining us now in studio, the aforementioned Andrew Potter, author of The Authenticity Hoax. Andrew, of course, you'll also recognize from his picture in Maclean's magazine, where he's a very fine columnist there. And we welcome you here to TVO.
Thanks, sir.
Let's start by having you start the way the book does. The French family who decided to chuck it all, cashed in their life savings, got on a yacht, and went on a sailing adventure. What's the story?
Yeah, it's the story of Florent and Chloe Lemisson and their son Colin. And a few years ago, he was an engineer in France. They sold everything, bought a yacht, renovated it, and set sail from France. And down ended up off the coast of Somalia. And on the way down, they were warned, apparently, to stay away, because as everyone knows, that's rife with pirates. It's a lawless area right now. And but they went down, and they ended up getting captured by pirates. And unfortunately, along the way, in a rescue attempt, it looks like Florent was killed by French commandos in friendly fire as they were trying to rescue them. And I use the story as a bit of a morality tale, because what they were escaping was what they saw as the depredations of the modern world. They didn't want the state raising their child. They were trying to get away from TV and consumerism and all the sort of things that we complain about the modern world. And they ended up in this lawless area, and ironically being sort of captured by sort of arch capitalists, right? People who are just sort of out there to steal them, to sell them, or to ransom them, and killed, unfortunately, by the very state that they were running away from. So there's a really sort of sad irony to all that.
But maybe if they changed their route a little bit, this would have had a more sensible morality, moral to share, I guess.
Yeah, and one thing I should be cautioned about is it looks like they weren't nearly as close to the coast as it seems. There's been a sort of further study since I wrote the book that they weren't as negligent as it sort of seemed at first. But nevertheless, you can sort of see the reasoning at play in their minds. Which is, what is the threat of piracy compared to television, right? You can sort of see the weighing in their minds, and I use that as sort of an example of the search for something other than the modern world.
So when you say authenticity, you mean what?
Well, that's the key question, right? Because you look at polls where people report that what they're actually after is the authentic or more authenticity in their work lives, their family lives, and in the way they eat and so on. But it's one of those words that isn't sort of self-defining. You need to ask always authentic as opposed to what. What is it being contrasted with? And what I argue is that it's being used as a term that invokes ideas or products or goods or anything that are in one way or another in tension with or in contrast with the main trends of the modern world. So the secularism of the world, the lack of meaning that's out there, the sort of liberal idea that we're all sort of searching for our own good. There's no collective good that we have. The market economy, the idea that we're increasingly mediated through market transactions. And finally, technology, the idea that technology is getting so all-encompassing that our personal and human interactions are mediated as well. So,
how far back in time do you want to go to point to the calendar and say, here's where it started and here's the philosopher that did it?
Yeah, well, you can. I start with Rousseau in the book, although someone sent me a great passage the other day from Seneca, where he basically says in about 200 words everything I say in the book, worth a while, and it's kind of like, well, that's kind of interesting. But I sort of hold Rousseau not so much responsible for starting the way we talk about the authentic, but as capturing almost perfectly the vocabulary we use for talking about the authentic. I use Rousseau because the way he talks about it, the problems he addressed and the problems he identified are pretty much the same things we talk about now. So for Rousseau, he's generally known in the popular mind as the person who talked about the noble savage, even though he never really used the term. But he popularized that idea. But for Rousseau, what was really wrong with the modern world was not that there was any defect in human nature, and he wasn't against capitalism. What he was against was simply civilization itself. It's civilization that deforms the human character. It makes us wear masks. It makes us engage in status competitions. And all the things that he didn't like. He saw Paris as representative of everything that was wrong with the modern world.
So what would he think about a conversation taking place in a television studio with lights and cameras and everything about this setting is completely inauthentic?
Yeah, he probably would have said, well, it figures. Right? He would have shrugged in a very Gallic way and said,
Can you draw a straight line on a continuum between him and David Suzuki?
Not necessarily a straight line, but I think there is a continuum there. I take a few shots at David Suzuki at the end of the book. And the main point I go after is David Suzuki wrote a column where it was on his birthday, and he said, sometimes I look back and I wonder, would it have been better been born when I was born, or somebody being born today? And he says, weighing things, all things considered, I think that it would have been better to been born back in the 30s than today.
And that's just try to do the math here. He's about 70 now, or
he's
so?
in his 70s, yeah. Right. So I think it was 34. I think his birthday. I'm getting it wrong. But
And he'd
early
prefer
30s.
to be born when he was than rather than now.
That was what he said, and it might have been one of those things. I'm getting old. I'm getting crotchety, right? But I think it captures a way of thinking, right? Which is that things were better. That things have been pretty much getting worse throughout the 20th century, now into the 21st century. This idea that most of what has happened in the modern world has been a story. It's a story of decline. It's not a story of progress. It's not a story of growth. It's a story of rape of the environment and declining health and pollution and all these things. And I think that is, I think it's wrong. I think things got a lot better over the course of the 20th century and 21st century, and I think we have every reason to think that they might still continue to get better.
Well, is environmentalism a search for authenticity then, do you think?
Parts of environmentalism are. I think, I would frame it a bit differently. I would say that a lot of what passes for environmentalism is actually a form of authenticity seeking, which is itself very often a form of status seeking. I think there are forms of very legitimate environmentalism that I endorse, but there's a lot that passes for it, like the stunt environmentalists, people who, a year without toilet paper or that kind of stuff.
A lot of the Greenpeace stuff?
Greenpeace stuff is different. It's stunt media stunts. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking more of the stunts about people who, the 100-mile diet, the sort of restricting your carbon footprint or these things. I think they're not sufficiently environmental for me to sort of get too worked up about.
Gotcha. Let me quote from your book. The idea that authority is repressive, that status seeking is humiliating, that work is alienating, that conformity is a form of death. None of this is remotely original. We have heard every variation of the tune, from 19th century bohemians to 20th century counterculturalists to 21st century anti-globalists, and we know every part by heart. It is not the sheer persistence, but rather the amazing popularity of the stance that ought to give us reason to pause and maybe reconsider our attitude towards modernity. What has led people to believe that the losses of modernity are greater than the gains?
That's a really good question, and if I had a sort of full answer to that, I would have written a much different book, because I think the pessimism and the fact that pessimism sells is something that I don't quite understand psychologically. I hope maybe we can talk about it later.
We shall.
But I think there's no question that people who there definitely is a political stance which sort of sees the bleak future ahead of us that's extremely popular, and seems to be maintain its popularity despite it sort of frequently proving to be wrong, sort of over and over again.
See, on the one hand, I can see why David Suzuki preferred to be born when he was, because you got Johnny Carson, right? You got Frank Sinatra,
right?
Which you don't have if you're born today.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's no heart bypass surgery, and there's no penicillin, and there's none of that stuff either.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, and you can just sort of start picking things, right? I mean, I don't know anybody who has polio or who went blind from scarlet fever, but my parents certainly do. And it's one of those things where I wouldn't want to say that the modern world has been complete success on every measure.
Well,
there are gains and losses.
If we're destroying the planet,
particularly. Destroying the planet, and I think global warming is a threat, and so on. And there are gains and losses. And what I try and do is say that I think on benefit, modernity has been a great thing, and that we always need to sort of couch our criticism in terms of an understanding of that fact.
Let's do one more quote.
Sure.
If everything is authentic, then nothing is, because authenticity is a contrastive term that gets whatever force it has through answering the question, authentic as opposed to what? In the end, authenticity is a positional good, which is valuable precisely because not everyone can have it. The search for the authentic is a form of status competition. Okay, how did the search for personal fulfillment that Rousseau advocated turn into another form of status competition?
It's sort of interesting to see how that worked, and I sort of tell a long story. But I think the short answer is that all of the various ways in which you can sort of pursue the authentic that I lay out by staying outside the market economy or adopting a minimalist lifestyle, sort of lay out the various ways, they all admit of degrees. And so you can see how it leads naturally to a form of one-upmanship or a ratchet of status competition where, one person is very much into organic food, and someone says, well, organic, And this was the big transition that happened from about 2005 to now, right? Organic was really big. And then Walmart started selling organic, and people were like, wow, what's that all about? And so we moved to local. Local became the big thing. And now that local is very popular, in fact, just a couple weeks ago, Walmart announced that they're going to get into local. Artisanal is the big thing. Artisanal cheeses and various sort of handmade sorts of things. And so you can see this sort of steady ratchet going up where, partly because people like to not just be good, but be seen to be good. It's an essential part of our psychology.
On the other hand, okay, that's food, but if you look at politics, we got a mayor in Toronto, our guest coming in on the 1st of December, who, people have observed, weighs too much, sweats too much, isn't very sophisticated, has a checkered background, and yet was the most authentic thing out there and won for that reason.
Yeah.
So authenticity has something to say in politics, doesn't it?
Yeah, and so the status angle is just one angle of what I think is part of the hoax, one of the problems, I think. And the other is that it frequently leads us into a reactionary form of politics. I think that it can lead us to celebrate exactly Rob Ford's kind of politics, right? This idea that take me as I am, and in the United States, you saw it with the sort of cult of Sarah Palin. This idea that her whole brand is built around just simply insulting people who live in cities.
But they think she's authentic.
On the grounds that she's more authentic.
They think she is who she says she is.
Exactly. And so I think that that's sort of the downside, even to set aside the status competition side of it. I think the fact that it indulges a very reactionary political agenda is something that personally I'm not that happy about.